Season 3, Episode 28 of One Man's Opinion. Today I am reviewing Goodspeed Musicals' The 12, a new musical with book and lyrics by Robert Schenkkan and music and lyrics by Neil Berg, directed by John Doyle and running through October 29th at Goodspeed Opera House at 6 Main Street in East Haddam, Connecticut. If you're thinking, gee Tim, how do you afford to see all these shows? Well, as a critic, I get invited to come and review them, so theaters in good faith give me tickets to see their work, and that I'll review them fairly. But, though tickets are comped, it still becomes an expensive venture with travel expenses, whether it be gas, train tickets, tolls, parking garages, dining, or the occasional hotel costs. For as little as $1 a month, you can support my show by becoming a patron over on my Patreon page. I'll leave a link in the description.
We were a revolution, the people's choice.
The real deal, freedom's voice.
It was the death of despair, the end of strife. With the promise of a brand new life, we were leading the way, love on display. Everyone trying to hear what he say. The whole city crazy with praise. Everybody hoping for better days, like a dream. The best there ever was.
You never got a word he said, I did. You all ran off, but look who stayed, I did. Loyal band, you rock. You pledged to stay by his side. If he had 12 men like me, he'd still be alive.
I will not be alone.
Never alone again.
I am not alone. Swear it's true.
I swear your life is new.
I am not alone. We will never be.
And we'll be
Don't have to be alone.
The 12 is a rock musical with a contemporary setting about what the disciples are doing immediately following the crucifixion of Jesus. In the long run, I imagine the 12 is going to be slightly controversial, but primarily among the more stringent Christian communities with literal interpretations of the Bible that may take offense to some of the choices made in interpreting the story. But there are important things to consider before getting too upset about that. First, there are 11 scared, angry men, Judas is dead at this point, who argue and fight with each other and are occasionally foul-mouthed. I have no problems with any of that, even the profanity, even from a Christian perspective, as these men are whose faith have yet to be fully realized, and when their leader of said faith dies and their own lives are at risk, it is logical that their behavior would be antithetical to what they would eventually profess. And as a person who knows a lot of Christians, they do occasionally swear. Taking the place as antagonist is Thomas, or Tom as he's credited in the show, played by Wesley Taylor. Considering his moniker that comes about as Doubting Thomas, he does seem ideal as the person who questions the legitimacy of Jesus' teachings the most after the fact. It's a smart choice, and Taylor postures about expressing his misgivings as other disciples like Pete, or Peter, played by Akron Lanier, and John, played by Kyle Scatliffe, try to make sense of their despair while trying to find some hope. After seeing the 12, I think it would be fair to say that this is not intended to be a literal representation of what biblical accounts state. And that's not just the fact that it's set in a modern setting. For example, in John chapter 20, when Mary Magdalene reports to the disciples that Jesus' tomb is empty, Peter and John run out of hiding to investigate what has happened. This doesn't happen here. I think it should be noted that no book adaptation has ever been totally faithful, not even the Bible. There are some elements that veer away from the scant passages of the Bible that address the disciples' post-crucifixion, but I think from a secular viewpoint, which this show seems to be taking, the Christian message of loving your neighbor and the Great Commission of going out and sharing that love stays intact. I get that without a resurrection, from a Christian perspective, it's not going to settle well, and if you're not cool with that, then this isn't necessarily going to be a show for you. But that has always been the trend with Christ-centric musicals before the 12. Godspell, Jesus Christ Superstar. Neither of those shows have a resurrection at the end. The musical is only 85 minutes long, and the news of Jesus' tomb being empty comes a little past the halfway point, so I'm not going to call that a complete spoiler. But I do feel it's an important detail to point out for the sake of expressing the musical's intent. Mary Magdalene, or Mags as she's named in the show, played by Adrienne Walker, has a bigger role to play in this as she takes more of a leadership position with the men, something that would probably have not gone well 2,000 years ago, but any modern adaptation, yeah, I can roll with that. Mother Mary, played by Rima Webb, has a brief appearance with a show-stopping number called Rain as she expresses the grief of her dead son and is the highlight of the show. Like most passion plays and musicals, there is very little humor in the 12, but there is a great little duet between Bart, or Bartholomew, played by Rob Morrison, and Phil, or Philip, played by Brandon J. Ellis, called Sweet Dream, where they reminisce about the good old days when they were fishermen, and that brings some much-needed levity to the show. Whether the 12 is accurate to the Gospels is only going to concern those for whom such a thing is important. As for the general theatergoer, there are going to be things that I think they should be aware of as far as criticism goes. First is that the characters are, for the most part, not well developed. Aside from Tom and Peter, most of the disciples could be interchangeable. It's 13 characters in a very short musical, and not all of them get much room to play a role of any significance. And on top of that, some of them have minimal interaction regarding the core conflict between them. Other story elements seem a little forced, like when Jimmy, or James the Lesser, there are 2 disciples named James, played by Etai Benson, proposes to Mags. Like, literally out of nowhere is like, hey, Mary, why don't we get married? It's a weird moment and doesn't feel right in the narrative. The intent seems to push for more developments of Mags, and while it succeeds in doing that, the way it gets there doesn't work. Then there's the red herring plot point for Simon the Zealot, played by Gregory Treco, which I won't detail here. But the plot point feels forced in order to make the zealot aspect of Simon be represented adequately in a story. Robert Schenkkan has written some great plays, like All the Way, The Great Society, and The Kentucky Cycle, for example, but here things overall lack development, which is uncharacteristic of him, considering how gigantic some of those other pieces are. Neil Berg's music feels much inspired by Jonathan Larson's Rent, with the power vocals of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Jesus Christ Superstar. Things don't get too crazy vocally like Superstar does, but the attitude is definitely there, and the cast all get very energized by the score, and they sing it with fervor, and their performances are excellent. The 12 is a decent show. There are some solid moments with a couple of real highlights. The message is there, and it should be inspiring for those willing to listen, even though it does feel very rushed and incomplete. But I am only one man's opinion, so be sure to leave yours in the comments below. If you'd like to see the 12, I'll leave a link in the description where you can get tickets. You can support my channel by becoming a patron on Patreon. Anything you can give is appreciated. You can also support my channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing, and click the notification bell to be alerted to future reviews. My next review will be Playhouse on Parks, The Complete Works of Jane Austen Abridged. Thank you for watching, and I will see you at the theater.